Welcome everyone to this month's Impact Innovation Lab webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Carissa and I'm the Innovation Coordinator here at Impact Innovation in Brisbane. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we meet on today. For me here in Meanjin, it's the Turrbal and Yagara people, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations people here with us today. So at Impact Innovation, we're all about building a higher standard of innovation, R&D, and commercialization practice. Impact Innovation's Lab series is about bringing those of us involved in innovation, R&D, research, and commercialization together to dig into specific topics and learn from others in the field. You may or may not know that tomorrow is World Creativity and Innovation Day. It's observed every year on April 21st to celebrate and recognize the important role of innovation throughout the world. It was adopted by a resolution of the United Nations to acknowledge the vital role innovation plays in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Here at Impact Innovation, we believe innovation is key to shaping society and organizations. It's enabling many of those we work with to tackle some of the biggest issues impacting the planet and the sustainability and growth of their organizations. We are laser focused on generating value and impact. It's what we all want to achieve. And today we're going to unpack how to generate value and impact through collaboration. To set the scene a little bit on our topic today, I'm going to hand over to our managing partner, Brian Ruddle. Brian is the chair of the Innovation Standards Committee for Standards Australia and represents Australia in the development of the ISO innovation standards. So over to you, Brian.
That's great. Thanks very much, Carissa, and welcome everyone. So the topic today is research commercialisation, and I suppose the reason that we decided to have this event is because of a lot of the conversations we've been having, with our clients that are running innovation programs, and they do have engagements with universities and CSIRO conducting research as part of their innovation programs. We also do a lot of work with CSIRO and universities and researchers and also funding organisations like cooperative research centres. And this whole area of research commercialisation keeps coming up time and time again. The thing personally I find really interesting is that it's nearly pretty much every 6 months or so it hits the papers in terms of the problems with research commercialisation, and there's a lot of finger pointing between research providers and industry and things like that. Personally, I think it's something that industry should be taking more of a focus on, in terms of what they're doing in terms of engaging research providers, but then getting value out of that engagement. And today, we're going to be talking a lot about, some of the good parts and I suppose where research commercialisation starts to fall off as well. But I suppose some key things to start the conversation is really around understanding that engaging with research providers, it's like bringing two organisations together from a mergers and acquisitions sort of perspective, or two groups, two teams coming together, and they're bringing different skill sets. And this bringing of different skill sets together is often forgotten. We throw the word collaboration around a lot, but a lot of the engagements are actually contractual. And sort of nearly like you will do research and then give that to us and then we'll go and do other things. But the collaboration is about bringing these two teams, different skill sets together. And where research commercialisation works really well is where you've got industry and you've got researchers with their different skill sets coming together and working in a collaborative way to impart knowledge and insights to each other as they're sort of conducting research programs and then starting to move those research outcomes into new products or services or processes that industry are going to get value from. So we're going to be covering, I suppose, on that whole gambit from coming up with scope and contracting, if you like, research providers, through to managing research activities and that collaboration element that I was just talking about, all the way through to, well, how do you take research outcomes and how do you actually get value from those outcomes in terms of those products, services, and processes. So I know we've got a lot of questions, so I might leave it there, Carissa, and sort of, we can get into the broader discussion and introduce our other panelists here today. But yeah, really looking forward to the conversation, and a number of the questions that have come through as part of the registration process are really interesting, and really looking forward to getting into those discussions.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So yeah, we'll introduce some of our other members of our panel to join in on the conversation. From CSIRO, please welcome Peter Kambouris. Peter is a seasoned innovator with over 20 years of experience in accelerating research investments into global innovation solutions for communities, businesses, and industries. He has been at the forefront of implementing and building capability in CSIRO for various approaches, such as Lean, Launchpad, Software as a Medical Device Framework, and the Australian Vaccine Pipeline, which supported Australia's response to COVID-19. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
No worries. Our second speaker is Scott McNeil from the Oz Industry Entrepreneurs Program. Before taking up the position of Innovation Facilitator at CSIRO, Scott consulted and coached small and medium-sized enterprises from a diverse range of industries, including manufacturing, mining, services, telecommunications, and engineering, to help them commercialize their products and services. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
awesome. So Peter, let's start off with you. Firstly, please tell us a bit about your role at CSIRO.
Thank you for the invitation as well, much appreciated. This is a really important topic, and one of the cornerstones about my role. This is a freshly minted role to help CSIRO integrate its commercialization activities. I span the whole of CSIRO, not just one vertical or one business unit in CSIRO. And my remit is to identify the metrics to optimize our commercialization activities, to identify the funding mechanisms by which we can amplify and enhance our commercialization effort through various partnership and models, assisting in building the entrepreneurial culture. But at the cornerstone is a commercialization strategy to ensure that when we invest in research, we're also investing in identifying the commercialization impact pathways, which are generally 10 years out. And it's also thinking about how we build and identify those.
Wonderful, thank you. And just to you as well, Peter, what are 3 things that make a great collaborative research project?
There's more than 3 things, but the ones that work for me are, it's a complementary skill set. And I think Brian touched on that at the get-go, understanding what each person's role and responsibility is, and identifying that unified outcome. So having that clear and goal and objective at the start is really, really important. And understanding that the goal of working with an industry isn't a research paper. It's actually beyond that, something that actually makes a tangible outcome. But the cornerstone is that relationship and effective communication. Making certain that you communicate good news as well as delays and issues is just as important. So to me, they're the cornerstones of a great collaboration project.
Wonderful, thank you. And now, Scott, over to you. Can you tell us a bit about your role?
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, I'm an Innovation Connections Facilitator. So I'm employed by CSIRO, but deliver on the federal government program. And my role is to help SME, small and medium-sized businesses, engage with publicly funded research organisations. So that's all your universities, CSIRO, ANSTO, and also some of the state departments. And the role is designed to help, I guess, guide the the businesses through that engagement process, help them sort of set up and work out who best they want to work with. So we'll also go and find who are the right researchers to engage with. And then we have a grant that sits at the back end that helps support the project.
Oh, wonderful. And what are 3 things that make a great collaborative research project?
Well, I'm going to probably pick on one of the ones Peter also mentioned was communication, which sits top of my list. I've found time and time again that any issues that happen with a project, it's normally through lack of communication. So we find that if you have strong communication, leading to a defined project scope and outcomes, then and also looking at what the IP issues are. So doing all that communication up front, both parties being clear on how things are going to work, and then regular communication throughout the whole life cycle of the project means that there's more success for the project. I think also important is for the businesses to understand what their freedom to operate is, how they'll actually get out to that commercial product, and what they have to think about along the way. And that's not just about IP, that's about certification as well. So is the business aware that they may have to get certified, and the research organisations aren't going to do the certification, so they may need to bring an engineer in early to work through that whole process with the research organisation, make sure the right tests are done so that certification will be approved at the back end. And then I think the final thing is, this is research, so we don't know the outcomes often, so you have to be aware that you've got to be flexible in that process. You've got to be aware that there's unknowns, and that you're going to have to be able to adapt and communicate with the researchers to find maybe other options around impediments with the project. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Scott. So I have a couple more questions that I'll just go open to you all, so jump in if you want to answer. But first one is, what can industry partners do to get more value out of R&D projects? So Scott, I'll start with you.
Oh, I think it's come back to that clearly defining the scope of the project and the outcomes at the beginning, so that, because it's going to be a bit of a two-way street there, in that the business may define what they want, but it's what also the research organisation can deliver on. So there's a back and forth that's required there to really define what the business wants, but what's actually is achievable. So I think that's a key thing to think about in the first place.
Yeah, awesome. Peter?
Yeah, I think also it requires an active involvement, and so it's not a set and forget thing, and it's active in 2 phases. It's active in the development phase and the research phase, but also in the commercialization phase. So ensuring that as the knowledge or technology is being refined, that your market readiness is also coming into play. So it's not a relay. It's actually something you do in parallel. Because sometimes what we often find is, because there is generally a little gap between the market opportunity and the convergence of all the technology and things occurring around the market to make the technology useful, and just making certain that the industry partner and the university are aware of what those convergences are also required. So that's why we need to do these 2 things together. Keep on developing the technology for fit for purpose, but also ensure the market product fit is there, and there is a first customer, and you know how that's going to drive.
Yeah, no, great. And I might just add something with that too, because that market readiness is key, particularly looking at it from an industry perspective. Another couple of things is around supply chains. We often see a lot of industry partners don't really think through the supply chain and the manufacturing and distribution arrangements around the research outcome, and also the financial elements, like what are the targets for that, say, that new product or service, or what's the cost base that's being aimed for. And the problem often arises because the industry partner isn't thinking about those things. They're not communicating that to the research teams. And this comes back to Scott's point around, and what everyone's been talking about, communication, Peter, as well, that if industry partners aren't communicating this to research teams, then research teams are flying blind. They're trying to solve the problem, they're trying to deliver the research outcome, but if they don't know that ultimately they want to get the cost base for whatever this thing is to $500, well, you can't blame them when they're trying to solve the problem, and they might use more expensive materials or expensive approaches or things like that. So that's where it's really key that communication is occurring. And similarly with supply chains, manufacturing and distribution, like who's going to be involved, what equipment do they have? Because if that is then also communicated back into research teams, they can have that in the back of their mind as they're doing the research and designing experiments.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Brian. The next question is, what can researchers do to get more value out of R&D projects? So Scott, I'll start with you again.
I think the real value for a researcher is actually understanding how a business works and how you actually engage with the business. I think too often, researchers go on this one track and they don't actually get to engage effectively with industry and find out what their needs are. On top of that, there's the researchers get an understanding of what's required out there in the marketplace. So they're not sort of in that sort of bubble where they're not understanding what, if they're developing their own IP, they're not understanding what's actually required out there. By out there working and talking to the businesses, you're getting a clear understanding of how what's required out there in the marketplace, and you don't end up going down a dead end.
Yeah, awesome. And Peter?
Yeah, just to add to that, it's really putting yourself in the shoes, as a researcher, putting yourself in the shoes of the business, and realizing that you actually do need to sell. You actually need to have a product that's solving a real problem that can be implemented today, not in 3 years' time. And so making certain you go on that journey with your partner, understanding that if the customer is government, that's not a customer. If the customer is the decarbonization industry, that's not a customer. You need to actually be able to identify a very clear first customer, you know their name. And that's really challenging for a researcher to go to that level. But where I've seen it work really well, utilizing activities such as the ON program, the ON Prime activity, where we actually facilitate those conversations with the customers or potential markets in a discovery mode. We do see more entrepreneurial researchers really responding well to that. Now they know there's a purpose for their research and driving it so it can be delivered. And that also helps get the clear objectives in place. So you actually know why you're doing it and you've got that purpose and mission in place.
Awesome. And Brian, anything to add?
So something that we've been doing with researchers and their research organisations lately, which sort of matches up with what Scott and Peter have been talking about as well, is with getting researchers to actually consider the different elements that industry need to be considering as well. So we talked just a moment ago about readiness. And so, we sort of often talk about technology readiness, market readiness, supply chain readiness, and financial readiness, and that's around our IC readiness tool. And so we deal with corporates and industry partners around that, but we've been using that more with researchers and getting them to actually think a lot more about, what the end product's going to be, how the customer is going to use it, but then also, where are they currently up to in terms of readiness around all of these different elements? And then what are they doing to actually progress those readiness levels across the board? So it's not just focusing on the technology, but starting to look at, as we're doing this research on the technology, we're engaging with customers and trying to understand things. So we're improving the market readiness. We need to understand the manufacturing and distribution. So we probably need to engage with, supply chain partner or people that are in that game. We may not finalize who we're going to be working with, but we need to have those conversations to improve the supply chain readiness. of the research program, and then the same on the financial, to actually explore some of those other elements. And it's been really interesting, very challenging for a lot of the research teams, but the strength, if you like, of their projects has gone through the roof in terms of, they're thinking a lot more about the information they're trying to gather as part of their research projects. And it's been quite amazing.
If I could also add to that, Brian, and regulation is this cornerstone that we, as a researcher, we sometimes think that's not about me. But in some instances where we come up with a concept that enables, say, a digital transformation workflow, why can't I send some information to a phone and have a response from that? We can do that today. We discovered a little while ago these things called bilateral relationships, in which certain processes are actually documented between countries. And it's actually detailed that you need to inspect a certain thing in person. And so no matter if you can do it digitally, that the workflow is not endorsed. And so making certain you understand those workflow aspects. So again, walking in the shoes of what your potential solution is going to do, and realize that if you're changing that workflow significantly, it's not going to actually be adopted.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So now we'll throw it over to our innovation strategist, Chris Stevenson, who'll ask some of our questions from the audience. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Carissa. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Scott and Peter and Brian. Some great points there. We've got a mix of people from industry, from research, and from government in here today. And when you registered, we asked a couple of questions. It's great to see that there's some consistency across all of our different groups here today. The first question that we asked is, what makes a great research collaboration? And the top answers to that are probably no surprise. They're all things that have been covered off, but the top three were clear shared vision, goals, and objectives. I've kind of summarized that because the words goals, objectives, and vision were used kind of interchangeably. The second one is good communication and clear communication channels. And the third one is trust. So I might just touch on the first one. If it is so important to have clear shared vision, goals, and objectives, how can we maybe make this better? Or what can we do, whoever's leading the conversation or all parties involved, what can be done to set clearer vision, objectives, and goals from the start? And then how do you carry this through the process, especially if it's a multi-year process?
I might have first go at that, Chris.
Yep.
Actually, if that's okay, because it's a really interesting topic, and it's something that we come across a lot. And one of the things that we've seen work really well is when industry partners understand that they're actually part of the research project rather than just commissioning it. And so it's sort of looking at their team members who are going to be working with the research team from whatever institution, but recognizing that they need to be doing research at the same time. And this picks up on some of the topics from we've been talking about previously, because there's a lot of research to be done on regulatory. There's a lot of research to be done on engaging with market. There's a lot of research to be done on the financial elements, looking at what needs to happen internally to be able to sort of use the research outcome and turn it into a product or a service or process. It's actually where we've seen it work really well is where the industry partners are coming in, contributing to the research project, and that builds on that communication piece. If they're just treating it as, we've contracted university X, Y, and Z or CSIRO to do this job, they're just treating it as a contractual, like you're engaging a consultant, and that's when it generally doesn't work as well, or the failure rate goes up a little bit.
would you say that maybe there's a greater role for industry to play in articulating what they want to get out of it and the value that they want to get out of it at the start?
Definitely, and it's the value piece. It's it's communicating what the final product or service is going to look like. It's all of those things, but often I think not all. Those that do a lot of research, they do it really well. But new players to research often find it a little bit hard because they can't envisage what is going to come out at the end as well. I don't know, Peter and Scott might have some thoughts on that too.
Yep. Over to you guys.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is actually having clear champions on both sides to define that shared vision. So you need to have, and it comes back to that whole communication. So you need to have those champions who are going to be a whole way through the project. So they're not going to be at the start, or they're not going to come halfway through. So they need to be ones that are going to follow through with the whole project. And the higher up in the organization, the better, so that they can actually make sure that when there's issues or when there's something needs to change or whatever, they can actually act on it, so it doesn't have to go through some chain of command. So I think it's really good to have strong champions, and that works also on the research organization side as well. So you don't want you meet with a associate professor or professor, and then you don't see them for the rest of the time during the project. It's some PhD student or something like that. So you want to make sure that you get clear communication with the right people and that they're involved with it the whole way through. That will help to set up the vision at the start and make sure that follows through all the way.
And it's not a procurement activity either. And so this is part of the key conversations. And because it's not a procurement activity, this is where we sometimes get caught around the agreement frameworks, because it's an unknown. And that's why the industry is engaging with a research provider to discover a new pathway. And so there are a lot of unknowns there. So reiterating Brian and Scott, it's about that communication. It's having a point of connection. It's having a regular engagement. It's spending time in each people's offices and workplaces and being really embedded.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Brian, you brought up the point of newcomers in terms of, I guess, the top tips and hints for industry partners who are coming to this for the first time. What advice do you have in terms of how to set really clear goals and objectives, or how to define value at the start?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of it comes back down to why they're reaching out to a research provider in the first place. What's the problem they're trying to solve, or the opportunity they're trying to progress, and having some good clarity around that. The second thing is, and this sometimes works well, but often the decision about the research provider comes from sitting around the boardroom, and someone says, "Oh, I went to this university," or someone says, "I've got a connection in with CSIRO," and then that's the decision making around who they approach. Sometimes, rather than thinking about, well, being able to find out, well, who's the best to target around this? Who should we have a bit of a chat to? And that's where programs like what Scott is involved in is really good, because it's sort of looking and supporting, if you like, that doing multiple checks with different providers. And I know it's something that we do a lot with with our clients. Is you can go out to 2 or 3 providers and say, look, this is what we're trying to do. What's your capability? And have those sort of conversations as well. Because it's ultimately about finding the good fit. You need the comfort around the team, and the alignment of vision. For smaller projects, probably not as a bigger issue, but for larger, longer term ones, it's a relationship piece, and you need to feel comfortable with them. So
that's perfect segue into the challenges, because one of the biggest challenges that our guests today brought up was how to select the right research partner. So this was coming mostly from industry. So thanks, Brian, for kicking that off. But Peter and Scott, what advice do you have for industry partners in terms of how to choose the right research partners?
I'm going to say, leading on from what Brian was saying, go out. You don't have to go to the first one that you think of. Look around, see what capabilities in different research organisations. Have a conversation with them, because the first, as Brian was mentioning, it's a relationship, and you want to know that you can get along with the people that you're going to be engaging with on this project. So basically, obviously we've got the program that I do, Innovation Connections, which is about helping businesses open up their opportunities in terms of who they can actually engage with. But even the business themselves can get there and just have a look and see, well, what capabilities are out there beyond, say, their local research organisation, because I think COVID's shown us that we can actually do things remotely as well and still get effective outcomes. So I think it's, expanding beyond your just initial horizon and seeing what's out there is the first point.
Peter, anything to add?
It's really an amplification of what Scott has just said. The solution is unlikely to be in one institute either. And so you're looking for a track record of teams that can deliver and people that can deliver. But also, if you're just starting here, start small. And actually make certain you can work with the team and maybe spread some bets across a number of institutes. There's nothing wrong with that, to actually find that great partnership, because the caca will hit the fan during a research project. Things won't go like planned, and there'll be that really heart-to-heart conversation that it's not going to work, or it's not going to meet your production schedule, it's not going to fit in with your current pathway, and you've got to have the courage, but also the confidence to work through that. And that's where I've seen the best things occur, is when we've actually gone down that pathway, realized the pathway wasn't going to realize value. And it was through that imperative that we both wanted to find a solution, that we came up with something very different. And it actually also meant talking to another research institute to see if we could partner with them. And again, to accelerate it. It's not about taking 3 years either. It's about getting this done in a very quick, agile approach.
Cool, thank you. And that's a great segue into the next challenge that came up consistently, which is around pace. So whether this is an assumption or fact that that perhaps the research side of things works at a much slower pace than industry, and that the expectations around pace are sometimes not met. I guess, is this a thing? Is it true? And if so, what can be done on both sides to try and work at a more consistent pace or uniform pace?
Who do you want to go first?
Brian,
Scott's doing well going
Scott,
first.
okay, off you go, Scott.
Yes, there's a lot of variability in terms of research organisations, how quickly they actually move. And we're talking more about the administrative side of it. I think, most of the researchers will work at an effective pace. There often is some delays that will occur, but I think you can manage them, as I said, through that communication process. But the administration, I think you can get it working better if you can do things concurrently. So, if you try and think about, okay, well, we're talking to a research organisation, we're doing a proposal. Maybe, for example, you're doing going for the Innovation Connection grant. You can actually start that process of what would an agreement look like fairly early on, so that both parties feel comfortable with it. So when you actually get to the point where, yes, we're ready to go, then you're not sort of going back and reviewing the whole agreement again and picking up things that you weren't aware of. So I think in that sort of administrative side, you can sort of work more effectively if you look at doing those things concurrently. And I said, with the research side of it, it's just about trying to keep effective timelines in terms of communicating about what's actually happening, and that's from both sides. And also, what are the milestones, how they're set, are they achievable milestones in the timeframes that you've set up? So really having those initial conversations with the researchers, go, and even taking a step back and go, hey, is the milestone you've set here, is that actually going to be achievable? Or are we going to get down partway through it and you're going to say, no, we're not going to be able to do it? So often, at the same time, the industry has to be aware it is research. You are going to hit some impediments, but you can work through them.
The other aspect I like to bring to this is that if you were saying the life sciences, it actually works at the speed of life. So if you want to actually have a medical device or software that can do some amazing things from a health and community impact, you actually have to validate and verify. And there isn't really an accelerated mechanism for testing those things. And so I think it also comes back to the budget and actually understanding, again, it's not a procurement activity, and making certain we've got the funding in place. And are we resourcing this? So if we're resourcing it through, say, a PhD student, we have to realize what that outcome is as well. So it's really thinking about how we resource and then setting those times together, but also realizing it does take time to invent, verify, and validate.
Yeah, and probably just adding to that, I think where there's often a lot of frustration from industry is when they don't fully understand what happens within the research process. So, over the years, I've been fortunate, with a number of projects where, every fortnight I was sitting down with research teams and going through where are they up to. And essentially it is a process of experimental design, running the experiment, and has the experiment worked or not? And, if it hasn't worked, and they'll generally budget in or schedule in a few iterations for that validation piece that Peter was talking about. But, if you get a few failed runs with experiments and they're trying different approaches and things like that, that's where time starts to become a bit of a challenge. And it comes back to, again, we're trying new stuff, we're trying to get new outcomes. But that's why communication is important. Just coming back to Scott's point about the administrative side, and this links in with Peter's point about budget as well, is sort of understanding how things are structured. You can get things moving very quickly within, a research environment. If you're prepared to pay for professors, associate professors to be spending their time, or senior academic staff, or researchers, and you're sort of in there and, funding that and getting things moving. But then if you're wanting to, say, get postgrads and others involved in the project, well, then that's a different thing. You're sort of based on their tenure and things like that. So the other thing that we often suggest is just understand your team. Have a discussion around, well, who is the research team? What is their role? And have some conversations around that. Because often that's where, the 3-year thing comes from, is that's a great timeline for a PhD student to get involved. So, if we're not talking about PhD students and the discovery at that stage, you can use other sources, but it might cost a little bit more to not use PhD students. And so you can do it faster, but there's a trade-off.
Well, thank you. Just reminding everyone too that you can pop questions into the Q&A. Now it's probably the last chance to do that. We've got a fair few excellent questions that have come through, so I might switch over to some of those. The first one we've pretty much already answered, which is how do you identify the right partners? There's a question here we might get into is there a standard or best practice for IP ownership, which I know that something that the panel had a bit of a chat about just before, so I might throw that one open around how to approach the IP side of things.
Yep. Scott, do you want to start? Because
Okay.
you're putting a lot of different agreements together with various organisations. So
Yeah, so I guess the perspective we're normally coming from is, business has an idea, a concept, but they need research capabilities to help solve that. So the two of them are working together. So it's and they tend to be smaller size projects. So I think so we see middle of the road IP gets transferred to the business, but the research organisation still gets opportunities to use it for research purposes, and also to use it with outside of a field of use. Now that's still it runs on a case-by-case basis, obviously, because if the university's bringing in their IP into it, then there's going to be some licensing. So these things sort of may sit in the middle of the road, but it will flex either way, and that's on a case-by-case basis. So I think really what it's about is having those conversations early, so that you can at least get an understanding of how that may look, and then you're not surprised when you get to the contracting phase.
Yep. No, and I think the big thing with IP is that ultimately it is all about the industry partners being able to utilize the IP for what it is that they're trying to achieve. We see a lot of people, for example, want to go for worldwide exclusive rights to IP, which is fine if they've got the capacity to actually commercialize worldwide. And so it's sort of getting this balance right between it all, because we've seen a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort, fight for worldwide exclusive rights. But again, they're never going to get it. They would have probably been better off actually saying, oh yes, the university's contributed background IP, we've contributed background IP. This is how we're going to carve it up so we get value out of it. And then, there's other ways of getting value out of other parts of the world. Because trying to go in and say, yep, we're going to own everything, it's sort of not recognizing the intellectual capital, if you like, that's coming in from both parties. And it comes back to that earlier conversation we were having around teams. It's about bringing, I talked about merger and acquisition. It's not the acquisition side, but it's sort of bringing two teams together with expertise and experience. And so that's, if you're taking that approach when you're thinking about IP and IP management and ownership, it's an easier way to sort of start the conversation.
And also, if you have a well-defined market that you're looking to address, it helps actually frame the IP conversations, because you bring evidence to the table about the market size and the type of returns that you're looking to secure. Because working on hypotheticals is working on hypotheticals. And so it's really important to put some concrete domains in place and build your agreements around that. You can always have those options in to extend your fields and the territories and the range, but do the one thing first, the one thing that you're committed to actually solve, the reason why you actually engaged to develop this new technology to solve that awesome problem, and get the deal done around that. I guarantee you that by doing that and maintaining that great relationship, you're effectively got access to the rest of the options for that intellectual property without actually negotiating it up front. Please don't record that. But what's really important is to just get that first thing done, because that's the biggest challenge we have, getting that first customer. Once we get that first customer in line, showing the product and the technology and the solution is providing that value uplift, everything else flows really well.
Thank you for that. I'm slightly bombarded with questions, and I'm looking at the clock. We'll go with this one. It's a pretty big question. How would or should the research sector tackle industry's biggest problems? It's a big question.
We see this all the time. We're currently designing programs around some of the biggest world problems at the moment, not just industry problems. But I think as a starting point, it comes back to industry defining what the problem is that they're trying to solve. You know, one of the best things is to actually unpack problems. And so, you know, if you've got high level problems and you say, what causes that? And you start to unpack, like, what are the components, if you like, of that problem? Because the challenge is you can have some very big problems, wicked problems and things along those lines. You know, you can fund research, and organizations are doing this all the time through cooperative research centers and things like that, or just individually. But they need to still, at some point, get it down into a scope. It needs to enter into some agreement with a research organization. And so for that, it's sort of trying to define what it is that this problem is, you know, is it a component of the problem? Is it the whole problem? And so a lot of it's that definition, because ultimately an agreement's going to have to be signed to mobilize resources. So.
I'm just building on it. First of all and foremost, go talk to industry. You know, get out there, have a conversation with them, and not just one business, but multiple businesses, to try and see whether there's commonality there, and and see where you can actually create some value. But trying to sit there and assess what their needs are without talking to them is not going to work.
Yeah, sorry, I was taken from the industry side, but yeah, that's definitely from the research side. Yep.
But also, Brian, you mentioned making certain you know the percentage of the problem you're dealing with. Okay. And so generally when we have a problem, it's not 100% problem that we think we have at the get-go. There may actually be a very minor fraction of that if we solved it, the rest of the problem would go away. And again, this comes back to the industry though. The industry is the commercial pathway. They have identified this problem we're solving and how they're going to address that market. So I rely on the industry to own that. We'll own providing you the solution.
Yep.
But we expect that you own that market and can drive that market and can capture that market. And that's the complementarity here as well.
Thank you. This will be the last one from me before I hand back to Carissa. It's around conflict and how you manage conflict. And it's come in a couple of different forms, but one is, how do you manage conflict in when complex decisions have to be made?
Okay, I'm trying to work out because the conflict comes from different expectations and understanding in a lot of ways, if I'm getting the question right. And so ultimately it is coming back to that communication piece. But I think, Peter, you sort of mentioned about fearless and frank conversations. A lot of those will come from confidence in each other and comfort to actually have those. And it's sort of, that's where that relationship building is really important. And coming back to Scott's point, I think it was about the seniority. The more senior the people, you can actually have some of those conversations and then make some decisions about how to solve things. There's a few other elements there that, again, around conflicts of interest and other bits that may have been sort of inferred with some of that. Again, a lot of that is conversations to understand framing around conflicts of interest, basically how to manage those things. But I know I've covered a few different points there, but again, Scott and Peter might have some other angles.
I always find that you actually need to call, if you think there is a conflict, actually to raise it.
Yeah.
It's important to clear it. And that's one of the aspects that comes back to the communication and knowing who you can talk to actually raise those. So I try to set up a mechanism where we have a zipper model, where if we're chatting, as we're partnering, I do want the technical team in the company and the research team to be unhindered in how they communicate and just do what they need to do. But making certain we've got an opportunity to have those sidebar conversations when things don't appear to be going, or there appears to be, why are you guys talking to that company over there in blue, right? I thought you were working with us. We've got to have the mechanism to have that conversation and work it out, because we may not actually see it. And that's why it's important to communicate where there is discomfort, where there is a apparent or of observed conflict. We need it raised. Don't think that we know what's going on and we're doing it purposely.
Yeah, leading on from what Brian and Peter said, the most conflicts you see arise from being surprised. So all of a sudden, you know, at the end of the project, they're finding out something wasn't done or was done differently, or it's not what the business wanted. So it's really around, as Beth said, that communication. So if you know what's happening up front, it tends not to lead to those conflicts because you're addressing it as things actually occur, and yeah, you can work through it. You come up with solutions. It's hard to come up with a solution after the project's finished.
And probably just one little quick thing to add at the end of that. That's coming back to this understanding of each partner. So, you know, where it's really valuable is when researchers understand the problems that industry are facing, like from an individual perspective. If I'm within an industry organization, like a company, what are the stresses and strains on my life? Like what's going to be of interest to me in terms of reporting up, managing staff, reporting down, like what's life like for me? And similarly, if I'm, you know, within an organization, a company, yeah, understanding the stresses and strains on researchers and, you know, the level that they are in the organization and the, you know, other KPIs, competing factors. When each party actually understands a little bit more about what's going on in the world of the other from an individual perspective, that's actually where, you know, that deeper conversation and trust and being able to understand why something may or may not have happened and having conversations around those things. Yeah, it just really helps it.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to stop with the questioning. For people who have sent questions that we haven't answered, we'll try and come back to you by email after the event. So thanks for your questions. If you've got something else in the next few minutes, please feel free to send it through and we'll come back to you. But I will hand over to Carissa.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So let's move across our panel now for any final thoughts and reflections and advice. So I'll start with you, Peter.
Look, and thank you for the conversation we've just had, because it's really important for us to keep hearing these questions coming from the community and to help us engage so we can keep on putting forward that language. But the easiest thing is pick up the phone and call me. That worked in our Trailblazer scenario where we were working with a number of universities to deliver on the University Research Commercialization Scheme, and was so important to have that point of connection for someone in our partners to know who they could call to address it. And so that's the key message here, is it is really about communication relationship. Use the phone and connect with someone who will connect you to where you need to be.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Peter. Scott, any final thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think the main thing is take the step in that, you know, get there and look to engage, as Peter says, either phone someone or just start to look and see if you've got a need, an issue, and you feel that research capabilities can address it and you want to partner with a research organization. Just start that process. Go and see who may fit with the capabilities you're after, and then just start the conversation. So, you know, there are plenty of people out there that can help you to find the right, get in front of the right people. So by all means, just start the process and see how it goes from there. Take, as Peter's mentioned earlier, take some little steps. You know, you can do some small projects and it can evolve into something larger as you go along.
Wonderful. Thanks, Scott. And Brian?
Yeah, I suppose coming back to, I suppose, mindset around engaging research providers, it's, you know, a little bit akin to someone engaging in accounting. You know, they've got accountants and an accounting group, and they basically bring them on board and then sort of meet up with them every quarter and expect the accounting group to be able to miraculously deliver everything that they're wanting. Like, you wouldn't actually manage staff that way. And so again, thinking of, you're engaging a research team and, through a true collaborative one, they're actually part of your team. And so it's sort of more, mindset around, what you're trying to do in terms of engaging with that research organization and that team, what information you're feeding to them and what information you're getting back from them, like you would any other division of your organization. And this is sort of where, large organizations that have got internal research teams, they're managing them like they're part of the team. And for those organizations that don't have internal research teams, essentially you're bringing that research capability in, but it needs to be managed in that way, like treat them as team members.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So as a token of our appreciation, Peter and Scott, Impact Innovation is going to make a $100 donation to a charity of your choice. So who would you like to support today? Scott?
Mater Little Miracles that support the Mater Hospital's neonatal unit. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Peter?
Oh, the salvos, please.
Salvos. No worries. Thank you, guys. So that's all we have time for today. We'll send through a survey after this, so please take a few minutes to fill it out so we can make these sessions the best they can be for all of you. The next lab event will take place in a couple of months, so keep an eye out for more details on that one in your emails. And thanks again to you, Scott and Peter, for offering up your time to come in and share your insights with us today. And thanks to our wonderful IIG team, Brian and Chris, for their time. But that's it for today. If you have any more questions, as Chris said, feel free to send them through to us at info@impactinnovation.com. But we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.